Well, I have some kid jokes for you today. Why was the baby consolation sillier than the daddy consolation? Because he was a little dippier. Oh. What did the boy star say to the girl star? I really glow for you. And what sort of star is dangerous? A shooting star. Have you ever stargazed? I love the night sky with the stars against them. Like, did you ever lay out on a blanket and just gaze up at it, the dark sky with the stars? The Midwestern skies, they just can't compete. Nothing can compete with them. They are so beautiful. Or just even taking a lawn chair and being outside and just gazing at the stars. Wasn't the moon beautiful with Jupiter up there right next to it? Oh my gosh, that was powerful this week. It's a beautiful sight. There's something about the vastness of the dark sky illumined with those little diamond stars. It does something to my soul. I have this little experiment here. I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I'd like to turn out the lights. I think you can see I have some stars lit up around, and because we're not in the greatest thing, if you could find some stars in front of you or beside you that are really illumined, I'd like you just to look at them. I want to remind you about Abraham. I want to remind you Abraham received a wonderful promise of hope for him from God about the stars. Go out there, Abraham, and see those stars. And can you number them? Can you count them? That's how many children you will have. Because you can't. You can't number them and you can't count them. And you could get lost in that sky. You could get lost in that vastness as you look. I was thinking, I bet you the shepherds did that a lot. I bet you they had an opportunity. They would lay on the ground and look up at the vastness of the sky. And I know they were busy. But there's times when you take a break. And they looked at the universe. And maybe they lost themselves in that night sky as well. And they may have had all these wonderful hopes for their lives. And when you lay there and look at that vastness of the sky, you might imagine that. See, the shepherds weren't very high status. They spent much of their time in their field, so like Eric said, they probably didn't smell very good. That didn't help their status at all. And they were under Roman Empire rule. And they were waiting for a Messiah. And they weren't sure what that Messiah was going to be like, but they were hoping for another wonderful, great king like King David. They sat on the fringe of society. They were considered marginalized. And so when they're laying there and they're sitting out on the grass and they're looking at the wonderful night sky and the vastness of the universe, they would lose themselves and maybe some of the things that they hoped for in their life. Can their life be better? And how about their children's lives, or their health, or their community, or their neighbors? They have freedom. And they might have laid there or sat there and looked at the sky, and their hearts would open up and their souls would open up and release those things and talk to God about the things in their lives. In that moment when their souls are opened up and they're talking to God, there were real possibilities in that moment, in that vastness of the universe, possibilities. In that moment, everything was possible with God. And they looked up into the sky, and it reminded them of God and who God is. And they remembered the wonderful, faithful stories of God and how God loved them. And they loved God. Like Eric said, they weren't religious. They had an understanding. And it gave them a sense of hope. We have that too, that same hopefulness. I have these stars in my bed, on my bedroom ceiling. I love them. And when I lay down at night, I talk to God. And there's something really quiet and peaceful there. And anyone that knows me knows I probably don't talk very long because I'm a morning person. And so when I lay down at night, I use those stars to remind myself of God's work in my life throughout the day. There's something really good in God's beauty. And it's something like the light against the darkness that I think that gives us so much fullness of God. The starkness of the sky and the beauty of the diamond star. It reminds us of our own darkness in our lives of despair when we're going through grieving or uncertainty or fear in our lives. The star is our hope in the midst of that grieving. I think that's why it's so beautiful. You could turn the lights on. Thank you. And we know that. We know about the hope. Is that better? We believe it like they believed it. We understand God like they understand God. And they got up and they went. That's a powerful movement. Understanding who God is, God called them. This light, this glory of God shone. And they got up and went. And they were expectant. There's a difference between expectations and being expectant. Sometimes we have a different understanding how we think God should be working in our lives and in our hopes. And we have it all mapped out sometimes how we think the scenario should go. And then something happens in the midst. And for a brief moment, we might be disappointed. And God shows us. God plants a hope in our heart. And it doesn't always look like we think it should. And maybe some of the shepherds were thinking that. Maybe they weren't all expectant. Maybe they had expectations. The big King David again, and take down that Roman Empire. There'll be a grand Jewish community again. Tonight, that night, their hope came in a manger. Not quite expected as they thought. And sometimes it comes in the places where we least expect it, our hope. God reminds us that the hope lives inside of us. And we watch and we wait for God to work. And it's not a positive, it's not a negative, it is God. Whatever way God deems that. I have a pastor friend who has a son who's married and has a child. And the son has veered away from the Christian religion and has taken up with something new. I can't remember what it was, and I'm not sure she really knew exactly either, but it seemed like a Scientology. Burdens her. Her heart is so burdened, and she's distraught over it, and it's in her spirit. And she said, she's somebody that works with wood, and she loves to create things. And one time in her prayer time, she was urged to make a serving tray for them. She wasn't sure if they really would like something like that, and so she decided, I'm not sure. And so she kept getting those urges and decided she was going to act on that. And when she created the serving tray, she designed it creatively with the little fish that go around the edges like a border. And she said she made it like a little chain. And it was for her. It was her hope. She said it was something she could do because she couldn't find anything else that she could do to help them. And it comforted her. But she said nothing really happened for months. But when they went to visit, she said her daughter-in-law began to ask her about her faith. What is the Christian faith? And what kind of things do you preach about? She asked her. My friend says that in that serving tray, she was comforted. But in that conversation, God was saying to her, don't fear. I understand what's going on. I know. She had her hope bloom. The angels say that tonight. Don't fear to the shepherds. You know, right in the middle of our lives get messy, and we have these concerns and grieving and things going on. And the shepherds receive hope. We receive hope. Don't fear. God brings them a message of hope right where they are. We don't always get it in church, and we don't always get it where we might be expecting it. They were in the field, and they might have been working and not stargazing. But they said shepherds, so I'm going to guess it was a small group, and they were like having a coffee clutch or between the buns, right? And there's the men, and they're standing around, and they might be all talking about what's going on in their lives and, what's happening and how frustrated they are in this Roman Empire. They might have been talking about those things. Ooh. This wonderful word of hope comes right in the midst. See, we release our expectations or where we think God might be speaking to us. There's opens up this place for us to watch and see God working. Whatever we are, whatever we are doing, God will speak a word of hope. We don't expect it. There's a young woman who miscarried a baby, and it's sure how Sharon and Eric's friends, Mary and Bill, are feeling. And she had such a hard time grieving. And even with the birth of a new son, she still carried that with her. And it was like the valley of the shadow of death, she says. Such a deep grieving, looking for a place of hope. But one day, she heard about a young woman who was going through the same thing as her. This woman had miscarried the same place right before she was ready to deliver. The baby was stillborn. She knew at that moment that God was calling her to minister to this woman who she understood. She said, my heart was broken for her. And I knew God was telling me to go and be a part of that place of hope. She said even though it was hard, she went. She offered wonderful words of kindness to this woman in this wonderful place of hope. The woman was so grateful that she offered her words that no one else had spoken to her. No expectations how our hope will be planted. We're looking and we're watching. We have that desire because we know God will make a way. And our hope will be there. And it doesn't matter our status, and it doesn't matter how spiritual we are. It doesn't matter men or women, rich or poor, lay people or clergy, shepherds or kings. God's hope is for all of us. God plants that hope. I get up in the wee hours of the morning, and I love looking at the night sky and seeing the stars. And someplace in that moment, God speaks a word of hope to me. Christ is our hope, born in our hearts. Hope is already there. We're just waiting for God to reveal it to us. Sometimes we get so caught up in our problems, we can't get to it. But God makes a way. God reveals it to us. We don't know how, and we don't know where or when, but God does. And we wait expectantly. Amen.